The stage is all set for the much-awaited Qatar World Cup final between defending champions France and Argentina. Now, France will look to lift the World Cup for a second consecutive time, while Argentina will aim to become world champions after a hiatus of 36 years. Good morning, I am Prarambha Dahal. Let's begin with the main stories. Defending champions France take on Argentina in the grand finale of the FIFA World Cup tonight. The title showdown is slated for 8:45 p.m. Nepal time. Families of Nepali migrant workers who died during the construction of football stadiums in Qatar failed to receive compensation. Qatar silent on the issue despite pressure from international community. Top brass leaders of the ruling coalition parties in a tug of war to secure the post of Prime Minister. CP and UML ready to help Nepali Congress if ruling coalition fail to form government. And the Nepal visit decade announced by the government in limbo. With less than 2 weeks remaining for the start, the government fails to initiate any preparations. The FIFA World Cup 2022 is underway in Qatar. The country has successfully organized the event with over a decade-long preparation. The international fraternity is praising Qatar for its achievement. A large number of Nepali migrant workers were involved in building these infrastructures, while a number of them lost their lives during the process. The families of the migrant workers have yet to receive compensation from the Qatar government for their deceased members who lost their lives while working in the scorching heat of the country. The government had provided 25,000 rupees to the families of the deceased workers to hold their final rites. However, they have yet to receive the insurance amount and compensation from the companies that had employed them in Qatar. Some families have received insurance amount from the Department of Labor. However, the Qatari companies have remained indifferent. Qatar is being praised for the infrastructures it has built to host the FIFA World Cup 2022. The Qatar government, however, is not sensitive towards the huge loss of lives and those who have been physically disabled while working there. The families of the victims have been awaiting justice for a year and a half as the government has not yet made any diplomatic efforts in this regard. Around 500,000 Nepali migrant workers have contributed in building infrastructures for the Qatar World Cup. In this process, more than 1,800 Nepali workers lost their lives while working in Qatar. The Qatar government has not provided compensation to the families of those deceased and has remained a silent spectator despite mounting pressure from the international community. Qatar had begun the construction of infrastructures in the year 2010 to host the World Cup 2022. Since then, 1.7 million Nepali workers have reached Qatar. Around 500,000 Nepali migrant workers toiled to build the World Cup stadiums. Among them, 1,884 Nepali workers died in Qatar during the process. However, the Qatar government has not responded over the huge loss of lives, while the authority has made no initiation to provide compensation to the families of those deceased. Voices are being raised around the globe over Qatar's treatment of its migrant workers. Various human rights organizations, including the Amnesty International, have been exerting pressure on Qatar as well as the football governing body, FIFA. The organizations have also been urging the government of Nepal to make diplomatic efforts in this regard. Qatar has successfully organized the FIFA World Cup 2022, holding matches in the infrastructures built with the blood and sweat of migrant workers, including laborers from Nepal. There is a general call on the state authorities to take diplomatic initiatives against the Qatar government's injustice and indifference towards the migrant workers and their families and ensure justice for them. Now, Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba and CPN Maoist Center Chairperson Pushpa Dahal have held discussions in a bid to jointly form the new government. However, both the leaders have remained on their stance to become the next Prime Minister of the country. Dahal Secretariat informed that the discussion dwelled on the issue of government leadership during the meeting held at the Prime Minister's official residence in Balotar. It has been understood that Maoist Chairperson Dahal for the first time officially made a proposal to support him to become the Prime Minister. Dahal had previously initiated discussion within the party regarding the top post. However, he had not held talks regarding the same with Premier Deuba. Chair Dahal had publicly announced of assuming the top post for the third time during a program held in Pokhara a few days ago. The government of Nepal, unveiling a 73-point tourism recovery action plan on the 24th of July earlier this year, had announced that the years from 2023 to 2033 will be celebrated as the Nepal Visit Decade. However, with less than 2 weeks remaining for the Nepal Visit Decade to start, the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation has not initiated any preparations. The private sector had been excited after the government announcement of the Nepal Visit Decade, aiming at reviving the country's tourism sector, which was severely hit by the coronavirus pandemic. However, the private sector has been disheartened as the government has not yet initiated any preparations for the Nepal Visit Decade. In the first 11 months of 2022, more than 546,000 tourists have entered the country. The tourism sector is the main sector which draws foreign currency into the country. According to the statistics of Nepal Rashtra Bank, the country collected 17.97 billion rupees from the tourism sector in the first 4 months of the ongoing fiscal year. Nepal has invested more than 1.8 trillion rupees in the tourism sector, while more than 1.1 million people have received direct or indirect employment from the sector. It is now time for our segment Public Pulse, where you text us with your opinion.
Public Pulse.
The question is, what should be done to make tourism decade successful? Your options are A. Market promotion, B. Facilitate air services, and C. Infrastructure development. The voting is on. Type NEWS, select your option A, B or C and send it to 34001 to share your opinion with us. It is now time for the international news. China's largest city, Shanghai, has ordered most of its schools to take classes online as COVID cases soar. According to Shanghai's Education Bureau, nurseries and childcare centers will also shut from Monday. Restrictions were eased by Chinese authorities earlier this month following a wave of protests targeting China's zero-COVID strategy. But the easing of strict lockdown measures has led to growing concerns over the spread of COVID in China. The significant changes in the country's COVID testing and reporting systems have made it difficult to know just how widespread the virus has become, with data for the week ending 11 December showing a fall in the total number of new infections across the country after peaking the previous week. But prior to the change in data collection, the number of cases was higher than that of the last COVID wave in April. Hospitals and medical facilities have come under increasing strain, with temporary health centers and intensive care facilities being set up across the country. Iranian authorities have detained prominent actress Taraneh Ali Dosti, star of The Salesman, which won an Academy Award for being the best foreign language film in 2016, after she voiced support for nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Ali Dosti on November 9 posted a photo of herself on Instagram without a head scarf, with a sign reading "Woman, Life, Freedom," a main slogan of demonstrators who have been taking to the streets. A judiciary statement said several celebrities had been summoned over unsubstantiated comments about recent events and publishing provocative material in support of earlier street riots, and that some were detained. In 2020, Ali Dosti received a 5-month suspended sentence after she criticized on Twitter the morality police, which enforces hijab or Islamic dress code. Ali Dosti was the latest of dozens of artists, journalists and lawyers detained over the past 3 months for speaking out against a violent security crackdown on the protesters, some of whom have been released on bail. The unrest currently gripping Iran was triggered by the September 16 death in detention of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who was arrested for wearing inappropriate attire under Iran's strict Islamic dress code for women. The protests pose one of the biggest challenges to theocratic rule in Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The mayor of Texas border city of El Paso declared a state of emergency, citing the hundreds of migrants sleeping on the streets in cold temperatures and the thousands being apprehended every day. Mayor Oscar Leeser said the emergency declaration would give city authorities the resources and ability to shelter migrants who have crossed the Mexican border. The move comes as El Paso, a democratic stronghold with a history of welcoming immigrants, has struggled in recent months to deal with tens of thousands of migrants crossing the border with Mexico. The city is bracing for a possible jump in migrant arrivals after a Trump-era border policy will be lifted on Wednesday. A record number of migrants have been caught crossing the US-Mexico border under President Joe Biden, who took office in January 2021, fueling attacks by Republican opponents who favor tougher policies. U.S. border agents have encountered an average of more than 2,400 migrants per day in a 268-mile stretch of the border known as the El Paso sector over the past week. Even as government officials move migrants in El Paso to other U.S. cities, local shelters are beyond capacity and migrants have been sleeping on the streets as temperatures dip below freezing. Now, Venezuelan children kicked off the Christmas season with a makeshift cart street race to preserve Caracas's tradition and bring the community together out of the digital world. Now, carruchas are handmade four-wheeled wooden carts ridden with a rope on which children and adults alike mount to descend the streets. El Retiro Carts Foundation's president, Edwin Acevedo, said the activity takes children out of video games and mobile phones and brings families together as all of them participate in building the cart. This was the 11th edition of the Carruchas Christmas race, which every year gets to gather around 300 people in the El Retiro community in the capital city of Caracas. Defending champions France take on Argentina in the grand finale of the FIFA World Cup tonight. The match, which will be played at the Lusail Stadium, is slated for an 8:45 p.m. Nepal time kickoff. Speaking ahead of the match, France coach Didier Deschamps has said that France will try to take the maximum precautions to adapt and to deal with the challenges without going overboard. He went on to say that it obviously was a situation. The showdown at the Lusail Stadium will be Deschamps' third World Cup final after he won it in 1998 as Les Bleus captain and then 4 years ago as their coach. He oozed calm despite the pressure of facing a team looking to give Lionel Messi his maiden World Cup title. Deschamps said that he had no worries or stress. He further went on to recognize the particular context that the Argentinians and some French people too wanted to see Messi win the title. Captain Hugo Lloris, however, said the game was bigger than just Messi. He said the event was too important to focus on one player as it is a final between two great nations. France have shown they can adapt to any kind of team, which could be a big asset against Argentina, who have tested out several systems during the World Cup. Asked to compare the 2018 final against Croatia and Sunday's match against Argentina, Lloris refused to look back. The French custodian said that they wanted to write their own story by finishing it in the best way possible. Meanwhile, Argentina coach Lionel Scaloni kept his cards close to his chest when quizzed about his likely lineup as he prepares to face holders France. Scaloni was evasive when asked if he would deploy a three-man defense, as he did for the quarterfinal against the Netherlands, to give right fullback Nahuel Molina support against France's lightning-fast star Kylian Mbappe. Scaloni made key changes after Argentina suffered a shock defeat to Saudi Arabia in their World Cup opener and brought in youngsters Enzo Fernandez and Julian Alvarez, who have been brilliant since. He has also made changes to his system, using 3 defenders against the Netherlands and 3 holding midfielders to neutralize Croatia great Luka Modric. As if Scaloni decides he does not want Molina facing Mbappe on his own, could opt to go back to the tactics he deployed against the Dutch, which would mean Tottenham Hotspur centre-back Christian Romero helping to fend off the explosive French forward. After Argentina booked their ticket to the final with a 3-0 win against Croatia, Messi confirmed on Sunday would be his last game for Argentina. Scaloni said that made it even bigger match for his team and his country. Meanwhile, Croatia secured the 3rd place in the World Cup following a 2-1 with a win over Morocco. In our Public Voice segment, we have asked people in several provinces who they think will win the World Cup this time. Let us now take a look at what they had to say.
Public Voice.
एकदम कन्फिडेन्स का साथ त्यो जोश जाँगर का साथ फाइनलमा पुगेको छ र सम्भावना फ्रान्सको देख्छु मैले।
एम्बापे नै बेस्ट हो प्लेयर, म उसकै फ्यान हो। सो मलाई लाग्छ यसपालिको वर्ल्ड कप चाहिँ फ्रान्सले लान्छ
यसपालिको वर्ल्ड कप चाहिँ अर्जेन्टिनाले नै जित्छ जस्तो लाग्छ किनकि यो टिमको सबल पक्ष भनेको नै मेसी हुनुहुन्छ
र उसँग एउटा युवा ट्यालेन्ट र सबै चिज भएका खेलाडीहरूको मिश्रण भएको कारणले गर्दा यो चाहिँ वर्ल्ड कप फ्रान्सले जित्छ जस्तो लाग्छ
अर्जेन्टिना छ उसको खेल राम्रो छ
And before we wrap up, here's a look into the top stories one more time. Defending champions France take on Argentina in the grand finale of the FIFA World Cup tonight. The title showdown is slated for 8:45 p.m. Nepal time. Families of Nepali migrant workers who died during the construction of football stadiums in Qatar failed to receive compensation. Qatar remains silent on the issue despite pressure from international community. Top brass leaders of the ruling coalition parties in a tug-of-war to secure the post of Prime Minister. CPN-UML ready to help Nepali Congress if ruling coalition partners fail to form the government. And the Nepal visit decade announced by the government in limbo. With less than 2 weeks remaining for the start, the government fails to initiate any preparations. So that is all for the moment. Thank you for staying with us. Have a beautiful day ahead.